Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast with your hosts, Brian Cole and best-selling author, N.D. Wilson. This audio is brought to you by Cannonball Books and Great Homeschool Conventions.
Everybody, welcome to episode 11 of Stories Are Soul Food. We are here with special guest Christine Cohen, who's the author of The Winter King and hopefully some other things soon.
A few other things going on.
Yeah. The Winter King, of course, is a finalist in the Christie Awards for this past year.
And if it doesn't win, there was fraud.
It didn't win.
Right. There was fraud.
There was. But we all know what we would have chosen to win.
Who did win?
Oh, man, I can't even remember. It was a book about
somebody fraudulent.
No.
Probably somebody some very nice person. I'm going to accuse of fraud the rest of the episode.
We'll just leave it vague.
I can't even think of who it was.
Was that book printed in China? That's what I want to know. The book that won.
Ooh, it probably was. Being as they mostly just get printed in China or Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Either way.
Yeah.
Fraudulent. Congrats, Christine, on having written a great book.
Thank you.
We can start with a plug for The Winter King.
Yep.
Pause this podcast and go order a copy now if you haven't already.
Yeah.
If you have daughters ages 8 to 16.
As somebody who was very much a male reader growing up, or sons, it's a great book.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Yeah, there's girl stuff in it, but it is very much a till we have faces at the YA middle grade level.
One of my biggest fans is a boy in my daughter's 4th grade class who several times when I've gone into class to give something to my daughter has held up the copy of The Winter King and shown me how many times he's read it. So
fantastic. We won't tell him it's for girls.
It's not.
Because it's not.
Because it's not.
Yeah, because it's not. It is about a girl.
Right.
And which is why we're going to be talking about female protagonists.
There's
today.
the theme. Cue the theme music.
Yeah, cue the theme music. Female protagonists. The Winter King. Get it, read it, enjoy it. It's a great one. Should have won the Christie. We all know it did, really.
We've covered the full scope of things. All right, but I wanted to start off with a question. It's kind of one of those things when you say female main characters go, what do you think of? Who are the female main characters we think of, and is
actually,
that good or bad?
Even before we get to who, what do you think of? Start with what, then we can move to who. What do you think of when you think female protagonists, Christine?
What do you mean by what? Like, I think who is easier.
I know.
I can handle
so
that.
Let's start with what, and we can move to who.
I know what kind of lists I think of.
Reaction, like just immediate knee-jerk reaction to somebody says female protagonist. Do you think?
Well, especially if someone says strong female protagonist.
Yeah.
What I think of is what I imagine you would get if you Googled strong female protagonist, which is pictures of women with swords. That is what we get.
And maybe the sides of their head shaved.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
A little bit, kind of some Viking influence for sure. Some tattoos.
And then
piercings.
a list that says something like the 12 best kick-ass characters,
right?
Female characters that we love, morally gray. They say things like that.
Morally gray.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things they say.
Oh yeah, that is the big thing right now. I don't know if you want me to get onto this
not
soapbox
black, not
yet.
white, not racial at all. It's morally gray.
Zombie colored. This is zombie colored female.
We got to avoid all binary black and white references.
It is a big thing in the YA world right now, where editors will say, "Give me your female characters who do bad things and don't feel bad about it." Like give me those characters who are just unequivocally
obese but still healthy.
Bad.
Murderous but still likable.
Yeah.
Still strong.
And I think that what happened was there were enough characters, male characters, that were that way.
Which we would always call the anti-hero.
Right. Yeah. But people were like, that's wrong. Like, why do the men get to do that? So instead of just like correcting, we said instead we're going to have women do that.
As a side note, that is a huge cultural pervasive problem where men are pigs, and in frequent cases, yes. Like, okay, so men are pigs and we are angry that men are pigs. We want to be pigs also.
Oh yeah, you see that
is the worst possible reaction to that.
I know. It's you see that in the music industry. It's like men objectified women for so long. How awful. We're going to do it to ourselves.
See,
like,
you didn't
Nicki
make
Minaj,
me.
Here we go.
Make me. I did it.
I did it myself.
Empowered.
Yeah.
Empowered
it's so
for
empowered.
sure.
I do it, daddy.
When Nate asked, what do you think of? I think that's it.
I think that.
It's those fake lists, right?
You immediately start think propaganda. You start to think about messing with gender roles, subversion, people trying to subvert something. And you're right. There's been so many anti-hero dirtbag guy characters for so long. Why can't women be rascals too? Is sort of, I mean, that's tired, but it makes sense that it's there.
And then not only that, but because they realize you can't have like the women be rascals and the men be rascals in the same story. So we'll have the women be rascals and the men be soft.
Right.
Like that's what you need to have is you need to have your fierce female leads and your marshmallow men. The men have all the feelings and the angst and the women are like, I kill people. I kill people and I don't feel bad about it. So
morally gray.
It's bizarre.
Phrase of the day for me.
It doesn't make sense.
Morally gray. I'm going to start saying things like, I had a morally gray afternoon. Today was a little morally gray. But yeah, that's really interesting. But I think when somebody says female protagonist, I don't think good book. I just don't. That's not my reaction. But I don't think good book when somebody says male protagonist either.
Right.
You know, it's just like, okay, it's a book about a girl. But currently in this climate and in and out of secular publishing, it is about subversion or finding really unique standout female characters, I assume. So the traditional fairy tale framework that Chesterton talked about, where you have a normal character and then the world goes mad, that is the classic fairy tale. Is that holding true for female protagonists? Does anybody want to find a normal girl, or are they looking for the abnormal, the outliers?
No, it seems like the big trend for a while, like I was saying, when you see women with swords, is that we want women to be strong. Right. So you hear the strong female protagonist. But the strength they want the women to have is a man's strength, which is like utterly insulting to women. That we're like, here you need to be the strong female character, which means you can't be female at all. You have to have all the male attributes.
But without the back hair.
Right. And it's like, it's so implausible as well. We're like, here's this 5'4", 110-pound woman who takes out all the men in the Citadel or whatever it is.
I just can't stop thinking of The Mandalorian and the introduction of his new hero sidekick.
The
MMA woman
gal.
Shock Trooper, rebel shock trooper lady with the shaved side of the head. She does have.
Oh.
My kids are getting real tired of me yelling at the screen. Battles are ugly when women fight them. Every time she comes on, I'm like, that's it.
This is definitely not leading me any closer to watching The Mandalorian. I've not done it and I'm not going to do it.
Guess what? She was such a trope that they brought her back for season 2 and she's just as bad.
I will say that last night I watched the opening of Wonder Woman for the first time on the request of a friend.
Another strong female character.
Ryan, on the request of a friend telling me we needed to have a discussion about it. And it's just insufferable. And I think that film actually becomes a little more charming later on.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say I felt like that one, my expectations are so low when it comes to female main characters that Wonder Woman surprised me almost that
I had to turn it way down and turn subtitles on just to get a little more distance from it because it was like watching 20 minutes of somebody's fingernails on the chalkboard for me at the beginning.
Is that when they're in their little fantasy land?
Yeah.
Okay, that was pretty bad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so once she's actually in Europe, in the modern world, and there's all this anachronistic humor, I was like, okay, this is kind of funny and this is playful, but man, I couldn't deal with the beginning.
It was bad, yeah.
But so female protagonists, it's kind of loaded right now in our climate, and yet girls are readers. Girls are the majority of readers, and they need soul food. Per our title of this podcast, they need good food, just like the guys do. Is there a reason, and I'm sorry, Brian, we're derailing, but Christine, do you think there's a reason why it's harder for guys to read books about female protagonists? Or even should it be?
Well, I mean, I feel like as evidenced by the number of guys who have come up and told me that they love The Winter King, I don't think the problem is so much with that. I mean, I think it's got to be more with maybe the way that women have approached adding like a female lead into their books.
You feel like you're almost not welcome? Is that right?
Well,
like as a guy,
I think I could try. I can track that.
Yeah.
So if you think that if you have a good book, a really good story is a story that's about humanity. I mean, it's about all the big themes, right? It's not about being a girl, but neither is it about being a boy. You know, it's about being, and then you are who you are. You've been cast in a particular role. So when I think of Till We Have Faces, I actually don't think female protagonist. The first thing that jumps to mind is not female protagonist, and yet it's a female protagonist. It's
Orwell's struggle, like her whole her complaint against the gods, and then her sister, and that relationship rather than
And same thing with Narnia. I don't think male or female. And I don't even think about the fact, I don't get right to the fact that it's pretty balanced, that he always plays with a male and a female lead, or almost always does.
Adam and Eve in every book.
Yeah. So I think
it's going back to what you said about, like, if someone were to say, what's the book about? And they said a male protagonist, that doesn't give you any information.
Nothing.
But if someone says a female protagonist, that's so loaded with
why'd you specify
feminism, with like all these things that
girl power issues.
Yeah, girl power and stuff that's very much like topic driven, issue driven literature that a guy would feel kind of unwelcome in, that I feel uncomfortable in, like that people who realize like, oh, this is just a book slamming men, or at least saying women are like way better and men are dirt. Like that's
something
so
affirming.
Uninteresting. But if you were to just, like you were saying, if you think of a strong female protagonist as just a human being with wants, desires, with a flaw that needs fixing, like those types of things. And if you just honestly approach the story that way, you don't need to call them strong female protagonists. You're just being truthful to the way the world is.
It's kind of funny because as well, I mean, like we're hardly cutting edge, hip, woke people. On the bleeding edge of what's current in the publishing world. And yet I would say, really tell me that it's a strong protagonist. Is the protagonist strong and I'm in or not? When I was reading Winter King, I didn't think I was reading a girl book. There's a whole bunch of girl stuff in it because the lead is female and therefore there should be.
Yeah, focusing on the Winter King, if you go with Cora and you're talking about Cora, picking that she's female, yes, she is, but but it's
That'd
also
be a
like
weird way for me to pitch the story.
Right. Yeah. It's about a female.
Right.
Period.
And
you know.
So with Cora, she starts out the story like obviously there's different ways to approach the type of female protagonist you're going to have. But with Cora, I was very much doing what Lewis does with Orwell, Until We Have Faces, where she is very flawed at the beginning. I make her make very bad choices, do very bad things, and then be called to account for them.
Yeah.
Because I was so sick of reading stories where the girls got a pass because they were girls, or for whatever reason, because it was hard, because like all the reasons that women nowadays on Instagram give each other a pass for being awful to their kids, to their whatever, because life is hard, because this or that. It was like, no, we can't do that. You don't get to be that way.
No excuses. I don't care that you've got this horrible situation and the false god and it's really cold.
You still don't get to act like that. Like, I'm sorry.
No excuses, Cora.
It doesn't matter that it's gold. Yeah.
No, that makes sense because when we're looking at Aristotle's theory about what makes a hero, and then that action,
as I often don't do.
I'm going to convince you, Nate, that it's worth it, because the idea of a hero making that choice that leads toward vice but doesn't arrive there,
right?
It's not gendered at all. If we're going to grab
that's the thing I'm saying is it's kind of hilarious that this is the way it works often, is the people who are trying to be, is if somebody's colorblind, you have the same problem. Somebody's racially colorblind. They're not prejudiced at all. That's no longer chic. Like, no, you need to be hyper aware. And that's where we are now with female protagonists as well, is it has to be hyper female, especially female, topically female, trend-based female issues of the day.
But does it really? Because they don't even know what it means to be female anymore, right?
No, but that's part of the spiral. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So what I mean is like we could be in a place where, we think that God created man and woman and with very specific roles and skills and callings, and yet tell me a good story. And if you tell me a good story about a female protagonist and it's a classic story and it's tapping into something that's fundamentally human, then it is a great story and it's for both genders to read, and it can feed the souls of both and the imaginations of both, which is weird that we're in that place. And I think that the caricature of people like us, people who take the Bible seriously, would be that we would want books for girls and books for boys. And we'd be trying to like affirm toxic masculinity and only write books about girls in long dresses who bake. Although, man, if you wrote a story about a girl in a long dress who loved baking right now, that'd be pretty subversive.
Is that a writing prompt?
That'd be pretty subversive in our culture right now. Especially if she was really good with a handgun or a sword.
She baked them into the loaves of bread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so the story has to be different. It can't be the same story, but you could write the Harry Potter series and it could have been about a girl. That could have been a female protagonist.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, or like if you think of like scriptural women, the women of the Bible, you have, I don't know, I can think of Jael and Deborah, who are
And Esther.
Yeah.
fighter-esque. Well, I'm thinking of specifically the ones who maybe like, Jael kills with a tent peg,
Overt.
Deborah, like
Yeah.
overtly maybe more militant. But the rest of them, there are so many women in the Bible who are strong in very feminine ways. Like you were saying, Esther, you've got Ruth,
Mary.
you have Mary.
Yeah.
And what I think that one of the unifying themes for them is that they are all so brave. Like they are unflinchingly brave. Rahab, they're acting within the story they've been given with the skill set they've been given. So many of them are shrewd and
They have to be because they're playing with a different skill set and a different vulnerability.
right. And
Yeah.
and that's the thing that I find so fascinating about the women in scripture, and that I think that we, especially women writers, need to tap into more, is looking at how very different so many of them are, but how very strong, I guess, they are as well.
So I think that's a great insight. And I think as I scroll through, we're getting to your other question, the one you're trying to get to, the who.
Well,
But as I scroll through classic books and like Narnia, and I think could you take that story and tell a story about a little boy who finds Narnia instead of Lucy? Could it have been a little boy and his big sister is, sucked into the orbit of the White Witch and lies and plays the role of Edmund? Absolutely, you could. And because the framework, the architecture of the story and the issues of brokenness and betrayal and restoration are all the same. But it'd have to be handled differently, and it's differently loaded. A little girl betrayed by her big brother is definitely a little more fraught than a little boy by his big sister, but it's just as emotional. It's like the emotional freight is just as present. But I think about if we move to your question now, Brian, if we finally get there after circling around it, we'll pretend like we are at the ground level and dealing with all the philosophical questions first. The who,
as one does.
Specific female protagonists. Do you want to start with good ones or bad ones or just ones?
I think the idea of a good one is the place to start, because I feel like we can grab some bad ones if we want.
Sure.
But I think the idea of, hey, this is someone who sticks in my mind as being female protagonist in a way that maybe it would make a good list as opposed to a list that gets pinned.
I always start first with Austen because her characters, again, are so, like, the thing that makes a good protagonist, they're active. They are making choices. They are doing things. They have flaws that they have to repent of by the end of the story. You've got Emma, just making a botch of everything around her. And it's just delightful. It's so interesting to watch or read.
Yeah, Emma's great there because she is making such choices and she's making such bad ones. And so, like, if you think about Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth is nowhere near as the act. She's not the engine driving the story. She's making choices. She's fantastic. She's a great character. But Emma is
the matchmaker.
She has decided. She has decided to do this, and she's really setting out to do a thing, and failing miserably and having to learn her lessons. I love both of those books. And as a side note, they're not like those aren't for guys. Guys, read those books. They're great books. They're fantastic.
I tried to resist as a college kid, and then I read one and thought, oh, we see who the lame-o is. It was me for not having read it.
Those are fantastic. You've recently complained about Austen. I don't remember where I saw this. In some of your work, maybe in MFA, or where did you talk about not liking Austen?
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was in your reading logs. Now, this is where we say that Christine is also a candidate for the MFA at Camperdown Writers Guild at New Sanders College. Let's get a plug in there. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, reading through your novel journals, you've referred to Austen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh. I read one that I was not.
You had a complaint about.
I had a complaint about it.
About her description of the way she'll move on from a scene and then tell you what happened afterward. I agree with you completely. I share your complaints absolutely. Which is not to say that Austen was a towering genius.
Oh, I think it was persuasion.
Yeah.
Which we were waiting for the main characters to have like a moment of reconciliation at the end. And she told us it happened without showing us the scene.
She does the same thing in Pride and Prejudice.
And I thought, why?
The finale.
Like, we've been waiting.
Yeah. So the big thing at the end, the big denouement of Pride and Prejudice is off screen, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake. She should actually write that dialogue. But I understand what she was doing.
That's why they moved it to the rain, right?
It was but she had scruples, and it was indiscreet to sort of be there for that level of passion, I think. So she was.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not to criticize her, because the medium was still being explored and discovered and invented by people like her. So it's, it's like complaining about early filmmakers,
Oh, I've got another one.
Yeah.
Sophie, Howl's Moving Castle. She's one I really enjoyed.
She's great.
She's a good one. And I wanted to move it children specific, because we could talk adult literary fiction, but
there's more in adult.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably not true. There's more that I know of in adult. That's different.
I was thinking of Alice in Wonderland or Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz,
right?
Like classic female. But again, even calling them female protagonists does that whole problem where, like, why would you say that? They're just a classic kids book, and the main character is Alice.
So I've got this idea for a story where there's a female protagonist who meets a female spider who writes messages about a pig in the spider web. You go to Charlotte's Web. It's like, it's a girl. Doesn't matter that the pig is a boy.
Right.
But Charlotte's Web is genius.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But just like Phantom Tollbooth it's not essential that it's a male protagonist.
Right.
Like that could be a female protagonist.
Yeah.
Charlotte's Web is great, and it's great that she's a girl. And I don't know anybody who ever thought that was a book for girls.
Yeah. E.B. White would be rolling over in his grave as us talking about it as a female protagonist book.
Okay, so a lot of these are younger.
Yeah, that's young.
But when you move into, like, I guess young adult is still a pretty new category in terms of publishing. But like when I was trying to think through what are books written for that 13 to 16, 17, the age range that your wife frequently texts me and is like, have you read anything worth giving to my girls? That was where I was coming up short.
I hate that Katniss has somehow taken over the entire genre as this is what a female protagonist, like as far as cardboard characters go.
Well, it could be worse. She could be Bella from Twilight.
That's true.
Even
is that
more.
Worse?
I guess it depends.
Really,
yeah.
Which one gets the worst star?
I mean, Katniss does for her actions. Bella does for just being a paper cutout.
Yeah.
A person that you're supposed to put your own face onto.
Are we allowed to talk about Twilight if we haven't read it? And never will.
I read the first one, so I can talk about it.
Okay, you can talk about Bella. I cannot.
She has no personality because you're meant to cut out your own face and paste it onto her. As a woman, you're reading it, or a girl.
But okay, so that's an insult. But that's kind of the goal for any author with a protagonist. And that's the reason why you're trying to write a pretty normal kid, but who's a little just a little different, unique enough that people like them and are drawn to them and are understandable and relatable enough that they can connect with that character. They can understand and relate to that character. It's not the same, I guess, as pasting your face on that character.
Well, what I mean with Bella is that she doesn't have a personality. Like that's the point of her is
she's a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum.
She's nervous. She doesn't like to talk. She's clumsy. I don't remember a description of her, but it was probably unflattering because it was in first person.
I read enough excerpts to know that the vampire sparkles. Bella doesn't sparkle.
Not until she turns.
I'm actually not even sure if her name is Bella. Now that I'm saying that.
Oh, it's like I hope it's not. That'd be even better.
That would be pretty good.
If we talked about.
No, I mean she's just an emotional sort of emoter, the nonstop emoter. If that's all it is just emotion.
No personality, just ooze.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could feel something negative in a scene, that character will feel it.
I would like to take a note though, real quick, and say this is a podcast about stories, and we're not sure whether that's the name of the protagonist of Twilight. That's right there. Those are our bona fides.
Yes.
That we don't know. And I honestly mean that. Like, we're pure. We've been kept away from the taint of knowing. And we'll probably have people who are mad at us who have found some religious themes in the Twilight series.
Well, so vampires are resurrection.
Fault. Yeah, it's Christine's fault. They are.
I told you this would be a spicy episode. Coming in hot.
So
do you think Katniss is she worse, Nate?
No, I don't think so. I think that Katniss again, I haven't read Twilight, but But based on Christine's description, I don't think that Katniss is worse. I would say that Katniss is better. Katniss has more desire, more drive, more active decision making than it sounds like the woman we refer to as Bella has in that series.
The protagonist.
the female protagonist,
the female
of that series.
protagonist of the Twilight series.
Yeah.
But I think it's the comment about she's empty so you can stick your face on her makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense of the success of the books as well. You know, like that's a weird wish fulfillment, and the marketing around those books was so heavily driven by which team you were on in terms of which guy should win her. Or, you know, it's like, and if you are placing the readers in a place where they're highly desired by immortals and the whole thing is a triangle, which immortal will win you? Yeah, that's a strong cocktail.
And I think that actually is also part of why men, or I guess teenage boys, are not going to go to a lot of the YA shelves that are primarily aimed specifically at women, is because they are written by 20 to 30-year-olds. They are actually read, my former agent was telling me, by 20 to 30-year-olds who are doing the very wish fulfillment we were talking about. Like they are wanting to write a story in which they could see themselves as the hot 17-year-old with the love triangle.
Okay, so you mean books for the 13 to 20 age range are written by the decade after?
Yeah. Yeah.
And read by the decade
after. And marketed to the decade after. It's an odd thing, and it's something I've even seen.
I was told this years ago. I was told this about even middle grade.
Oh, yeah.
And it's 80. They said 85% or so at that moment of readers were adults.
So at this point, we're not writing to children to give them a good story. We're writing to this echo chamber who's all like, "Oh, I loved how hot the two guys were in your story." Like, it's just the weirdest thing.
Zoinks.
Yeah.
Which is a technical term, meaning
indicating alarm.
Okay. So as far as it goes, Katniss really is going to define things. Are we allowed to branch out into female characters in general, or can we?
I think we should. We should go broader. Because
what do you think, Christine? What do you think of Tolkien's female characters? There have been a lot of complaints over the various decades that he doesn't have enough, or he draws them inadequately.
Yeah, the screenwriter said that the masculine energy of the books was so strong that they had to add elf characters.
Oh yeah.
Female elf characters, etc., to help off. And they said they didn't have a problem with the original, just the masculine energy was too strong.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm
you know what happens
shuffling through.
The masculine energy is too strong. I don't know.
Wait, we really don't.
In a movie?
Apparently it becomes a classic that lasts for all time.
Yes, apparently.
Well, okay, so when I think of female protagonists or female characters in Tolkien, like the one that stands out is Eowyn. And she has one of the best character arcs ever. And she is full of longing and desire at the beginning. She wants to be a shield maiden. She's
rotting.
She's in a cage. That's what she fears, is this cage that she's in. She doesn't understand why she can't go and defend Rohan like her brother. And so she does it. She goes out to the battlefield and she is triumphant in one sense and then completely wounded in another, and has to go and heal, and not only heal physically, but heal emotionally, from deal with all this longing and turn away from it and become a healer herself. And to me, well, that's the thing. Like if you go online now and look up Eowyn, all you get is a bunch of people complaining about how Tolkien was so misogynistic to make her not become.
She has to submit to Faramir.
She submits,
and let go of.
Weirdly,
Aragorn.
she had to submit to Aragorn first.
Oh yeah, right. Okay,
that's the weird part. It's like and that's less about gender and more about kingship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the nature of Tolkien's view of kings and hierarchies, which you see also play out in That Hideous Strength. The exact same theme plays out with Ransom and Jane and Mark, and plays out beautifully and brilliantly. But Lewis is 100% pulling that from his friend, and, you know, shared vision where Aragorn has to tell Eowyn first and get that submission there first before she can.
Yeah, so talk what you mean about that idea of submission, because I have a feeling everyone's going to hear it and immediately think, wait, what are you saying? Is this some sort of
basically the gist is that everyone exists in hierarchy. Everyone.
Every last person
exists in hierarchies, and they are submitting up the chain every single character is in submission. And then down the chain, they also have to discover the themes that both Tolkien and Lewis explored, that the kingdom exists not for the king, but to be served by the king. The king exists for the kingdom. So the one in authority exists solely to live on behalf of those who submit to him. And on down, we see this with moms, right? We see this with mothers where they can feel like, man, I'm sacrificing all day. And that's because they are. That's their role. The kids are in submission to the mother, and yet the mother is constantly sacrificing herself and serving. And you go up the chain, for both Lewis and Tolkien, they'd move up the chain and say that the wife exists in submission, this type of submission, up the chain to the husband, who then exists to die for her. Just like the mom exists to lay herself down for those who are under her authority, so he exists to lay himself down for her. But then up the chain there, he has those he has to be in submission to. And so what we see with both Lewis and Tolkien, they play that out, and it's very medieval. There's a beauty to it, and Lewis describes the whole big world in his book, The Discarded Image, which I really, really love. Everything exists when it's functioning rightly in a state of love and submission. So love, sacrifice, and submission. And so Ransom in That Hideous Strength has to tell Jane to knock it off and kind of like get in the inner spot in the chain. And it's a contested, that's a highly debated and contested section of those books. And I think Lewis is doing something bigger than talking about marriage. He's talking about marriage. He's slotting marriage into the whole big medieval framework and hierarchy that he's playing with. But we see the exact same thing with Aragorn and Eowyn, where this really strong female, very, very strong female character who has been eaten up with ache, yearning, longing, desire to matter, to live, to make a difference, to be high impact. And she has placed as a placeholder her affection for Aragorn. You know, so she's in love with Aragorn, but not really. You know, he represents this escape from a cage, something higher and bigger and better. And weirdly, Tolkien pulls off something really deft with her, where he gives her what she wants, and leaves her empty.
Yeah.
You know, so she gets the thing. She is the hero. She defies the king. She kills the king of the Nazgul. She does this amazing thing. She goes down in the songs forever, and she's empty. You know, empty and dying of a broken heart. And it's still not because she's in love with Aragorn. It's because she's still longing. And so then Aragorn comes around and has to tell her to stop. And then she doesn't, a lot of people think it's like a fork where she has a crush on Aragorn and then she moves to having a crush on Faramir. And it's not that. Faramir is in submission to Aragorn. Mm-hmm. You know, Faramir is a prince who's basically stepping in and falling for this girl very much in a way like as commanded, which is very, very interesting. He's subordinating his own affections and emotions. It's not an arranged marriage. He's genuinely falling for her and genuinely loving her, but he's doing it out of obedience to his king, which is
submission
very, very,
again.
Yeah. So I think, Tolkien, Eowyn is extremely relatable to many girls.
Yeah. And guys. Yeah. And I think that the reason Tolkien can do that so well is just because he understands human psychology. Like, and that is the same thing with Lewis. Like, how did he get away with writing Orwell? Yeah.
So many men, when they sit down to write a female main character, would just really struggle.
Trying to write that character, the ugly woman.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be, she's gonna rule the kingdom, and she's so ugly she wears a veil. It's
know.
Whoa.
Can you imagine pitching that to an editor? Like, bear with me. This is my plan.
It's gonna be the whole myth of Cupid and Psyche.
Don't worry.
It'll be great.
But he does it so brilliantly just because he gets the way people think. And Tolkien is the same way. So
I think also they could both write those characters because they both are those characters. And that's one of the truths about being an author. If you're going to craft a character successfully, you have to have some kind of connection, some point of connection. I think Lewis relates to her on a more fundamental level than we could ever understand.
Oh, yeah.
You know, from the unathletic guy with a fused thumbs, you know, the fact that his thumbs couldn't bend and he was never, as a result, he was never the skilled one. The fact that he had his mind and he loved the stories of greatness. He loved the poems. He loved the sagas. And yet, he was a wordsmith and a critic. So I think he understands her. And I also think Tolkien understands the longing in Eowyn. And he and Lewis both talk about longing a lot and yearning. And so I think that he's placing a yearning he's very familiar with into a female character.
Yeah.
It's not uniquely female or male. I think he makes it so, and he does a really good job doing that. But I think he's felt that. I think he knew it, which is why it's so convincing.
I think that's a really good point. I think that oftentimes I can see when I read a book, authors, they're always working through issues, right? Like in their writing. And you can usually tell whether an author has arrived at a conclusion or not, or whether they're still searching for an answer in the way they craft their stories. So like with Till We Have Faces, if Lewis had not figured out in order to deal with these issues, I have to be honest with the sin in my heart and confess it and deal with it, then it would have been a completely different story and it would have just ended so poorly. And I think with The Winter King, I've had a lot of people say Cora, I understand Cora. I get where she's coming from. I'm like, yeah, I do too. Cause I have dealt with those same things, with having really difficult situations where the temptation is to be I deserve this bad attitude. I've earned it because this awful thing happened. I have
purchased this.
Yeah.
And no male ever felt that way.
Actually, you purchased this bad attitude for me. You paid for this.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I think that's, I think that ultimately where we arrive in here with female protagonists, I'm all for them. I want more of them. But at the same time, it's kind of strange. I want more. I just want more good stories.
Right.
And I don't care whether it's a male or female protagonist. I want more great stories.
And that's, I think I don't have any mission to, I plan to write many more books, Lord willing. I don't have any mission to be I'm writing strong female characters, but I will probably always write female leads because I am a woman, because that's what comes easiest to me. And because I do think that there are a lot of, like I was saying, that 13 to 18-year-old reader who's thinking, what do I pick up has a girl as the lead that's good, that's well written. And I think there are so many lies in our society geared at women right now, at girls who are growing up into hey, you don't have to take responsibility for your actions. So many lies by girls, for girls. By girls, for girls. Again, half of Instagram. Half? You don't have to take
3/4.
80%. You don't have to take responsibility for your actions. You don't have to submit to anyone. You can be the boss lady at work and not have any babies and you'll be totally fulfilled. There are so many idols that need to be toppled. And I think you can do those really well through fiction.
So why not talk about raising daughters here? Because this is actually, it's very much the same thing. You have a bunch of daughters there, Brian.
A big fat 0. So I'll be quiet for a bit and hear what you guys say.
But it's when I want to give books to my kids that make them better and stronger. One of the big misconceptions I think about the history of Christianity and the nature of femininity in Scripture and in history, what you said earlier about the female characters in Scripture being so very brave, so very courageous and having to be. There's a weird lie / heresy that exists floating out there as a slander towards Christians, but also in weird corners of Christendom, that women should be docile, right? They should be flat. They should be Bella in Twilight. They should be just a receptacle. It's that's it. They're a servant. They're just subordinate. They should be empty of thoughts. That's terrible. And unfortunately, the weird thing is that when you talk about the lies on Instagram, a lot of the female Instagram, the poor little sad world is powered by emptiness. So they're fulfilling the stereotype in a really sad way. But I want my daughters, and I have 3 of them, to be terrifying to, to guys. I want them to be intimidating. I want them to be terrifying. I want them to be strong female protagonists. So you want them to be courageous. You want them to be brave, but you don't want them to be full of loathing and resentment for who they are and their own femininity. You want them to be women, but women who know, in whose image they're made, and you'd like them to be terrifying. Mm-hmm. So I want them to read stories about Eowyn. I want them to read stories about strong female protagonists, whether it's Jael or Deborah or Esther.
Abigail.
Yeah,
talk about
gosh.
Talk about someone taking some incentive.
Yeah. But it's so it is weird how in Christian circles people can really want their kids above all else to be well behaved.
Mm-hmm.
And well behaved boys look one way and well behaved girls look another. And so they want them to be easily controlled, which is not what we're looking for. I don't want any of their spirits to be broken at all. I want them to be quite terrifying, ungovernable to the wrong people.
Well, and I think that where the difficulty lies is that you see the bumper stickers like well-behaved women seldom make history. And what they're talking about there is like not at all what necessarily what we're talking about.
No.
And so that's where it comes down to.
Although we're getting there in our culture.
Yeah, it's true. Where you're trying to show to your daughters, yes, you need to be principled. You need to stand up for what is right. You need to be brave and courageous and want things and seek for things as long as it is always with an attitude of open-handedness to God and gratitude and thankfulness. Because I think so much of that idea of the like well-behaved woman is coming from a place of like, well, things were so awful for women up until the 20th century. And now we're finally seeing some liberation and let's go see them like break glass ceilings. And it's not at all coming from any sort of place of thankfulness. It's coming from a grasping greed, a desire to like one up men. And so I think that that's where, showing them that balance of like, you should be looking at what God has given you, the circumstances you are placed in, and attack that with the ferocity that the Lord has given you.
Yeah. And I want my sons to fear God and no man. And I want my daughters to fear God and no man.
Right.
Like that's it. So back to the Lewis Tolkien submission hierarchy, the stack. When a woman gets married, you don't want her to be easily governable by just men in general. If she stands and takes a vow to love, cherish, honor, and obey up front, she should mean that. And she should mean that. But ultimately, she's submitting to God. She's submitting to God and she's not being forced into any kind of submission. Then any kind of forced submission is broken. So voluntary submission, the husband should be voluntarily submitting his life and submitting up the chain, and everybody's laying their lives down. But I don't want stories about docile girls.
Right.
I want stories about courageous girls.
Because that in no way prepares them for motherhood, which is one of the most terrifying and difficult blessings ever. It is
chores blessings.
Blessings. It's so, and that's something I talk to my daughters about a lot, is like, this is really hard work mentally, physically, spiritually, and you need to be tough in order to do it. And that's glorious.
Yeah, I think so. The courageous, the last thing I'm looking for is, and I don't mean to back end an entire genre, which probably has some towering, glorious examples, but I don't want teen Amish romance. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for female protagonists for my daughters to read about, or female protagonists for my sons to read about, who are just docile submissives. Like I love the Éowyn character, but I also love Woodhouse, which is not for children at all, but all my kids read him because I love what Spitfires his female characters are.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where they are Spitfires. They are not just subordinate.
Right.
And then there's some hilarious comic dance, between some guy, Smith and Eve Halliday, or some great romance, a lot of rom-com glory in those books. But there's just so many ditches in this particular discussion, so many misconceptions about women. Going back to the Victorian era when women were holier, they were the influence of holiness. The stories that are always about women saving men, it's quite it's a trope that's been around forever, where the woman is pure and for some reason she's willing to hang out with this dirtbag. We've catechized girls forever. I made The River Thief and wrote that story to just kick against the absolute dogmatic catechism that good girls must go for bad guys.
Right.
If you're a good girl and you're fantastic and you're pure and some wretch comes along, you are obligated to fall for him. And this goes back to Prohibition in America. This goes back to Victorianism, women as the influence of holiness or as the vehicle of the Holy Spirit. Super weird and broken. And then now that pendulum is swung all the way the other direction, where it's all about the morally gray.
Exactly.
Now it's about, can we have stories of women who don't feel bad for being bad?
Yeah.
So we need more. We need more writers like Christine, and we need more of these books because it's unlike stories for guys, like male protagonists, where there's been a ton of bad ones for a long time, and there's been a lot of good ones. It just feels like there's just not as many. There's not a wide river of healthy ones. And if you go farther back, they don't get healthier. They just get weirder. Right?
Yeah.
So they get over romantic, or they fall into the weird Victorianism, or there's just not a bunch.
Yeah.
So it's like Scripture, Lewis.
All the Christiana, books. We got Bunyan. I was remembering Bunyan.
Yeah, Bunyan. And then we have all the books that have yet to be written. Yeah. Not meaning to be dismissive of all those great books with female protagonists that I don't know about.
Well, really, I racked my brains last night trying to think of some, particularly in like the young adult age range.
Really striking, memorable.
Up short. Nope.
So it's on to you, Christine.
Okay.
Before we cut this off, because I know we have to, I'm actually gonna do this plug. I want to know, Christine, what has the MFA been like? Tell people who are interested in a low residency MFA, what's it like?
First, explain what the MFA is.
Okay. So the Camperdown Writers Kiln is a low residency MFA in creative writing at New St. Andrews College, of which I am the director.
That means you come here and visit. You don't have to.
You come 3 times a year, and you do a lot of reading and writing in between. 3 one-week sessions a year to get your master's in fine arts and creative writing, which Christine is currently engaged in. She's completed all her work. Well, you're not.
I haven't graduated. I haven't walked yet. Will I graduate? Should we talk about this right now? How are my grades looking?
It's funny you brought this up. So Christine is done. She's completed the course, and you're one of the first batch to do so because it's a new program.
Yeah.
What's it been like?
Yeah. So it was 6 weeks total in class, and each of those weeks felt a lot like drinking from a fire hose in a good way, where you would be working on your own, reading, writing, sending stuff in, I think occasionally for feedback, but mostly independent work. And then you got to go for a week, 8 to 5, 5:30, and listen to lectures, do a lot of live writing, which I was the most worried about that going in, having to write in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, a little sketch for Nate, and then read it out to the class and have everyone critique it. Didn't sound like my cup of tea, but was actually one of the most helpful parts of the whole process.
Good.
So I actually wrote the beginning to the novel, my most recently completed novel, in one of those live workshops. And it so far has stuck.
That is pretty cool.
Nice.
See if it makes it into the finished product. But that part of it in particular was really invaluable. For me, I'd written several novels before I joined the program, and I'd read all of the editing books because I love books on craft. But those books are always trying to hit with a broad brush any problems anyone might ever have with writing. So they can't actually tell you what your problems are and what your strengths are. And so for this program to be able to come in and have Nate, Aaron, Jess say, this is what you're good at, this is what you need to work on specifically, and then be able to see how I improve through the couple years was just fantastic. It was great.
Okay. So this is how we like to do the comment box at the Camperdown Writers Kiln, is we're just going to do it publicly in a podcast. I should do this with every graduate.
We should have got Forrest. We missed him.
Yeah, we could do it again.
We'll drag him back.
What would make it better, Christine?
Oh,
more strong female protagonists.
That's her job now.
I think probably, I'm always craving more feedback. So more and more from you telling us.
This is true of aspiring writers in general.
Yeah, it's
true. We'll always take more.
Yeah. But I think there were some assignments I turned in just the final draft.
Right.
If I had turned in a rough draft, known what I was doing wrong, I could have corrected looking at those film treatments.
We're treading around deep waters.
Tiptoeing around a wound.
That I may or may not have with me for the rest of my life. Yeah, that would possibly be how I would improve it. I think that being said, I have gained feedback, not just from you, but from other writers in the program. And that has been fantastic. So Ian, one of the guys in the program, we just recently swapped manuscripts, and knowing that these are going to, I've had beta readers in the past and I have some fantastic ones, but to have people who are at the same level or working on the same stuff that I am is really fantastic to make that sort of community and those connections.
Nice. Okay. So since it's a young program, I'm actually always thinking about what else we need to be adding or doing, and whether or not it is in fact a good experience. Got to make sure it actually is. So the goal for the MFA is not to create people who have graduate degrees and don't write.
Yeah.
We want to try to generate more stories. The mission is more stories. Stories are soul food, more stories, which means more storytellers. Got to have more storytellers. And Christine is now one of them. I recruited her heavily.
Yes, you did.
Yes. Yeah, I pursued her. I'm glad I did. And we can't quite claim Winter King because you were already so far down the track on Winter King.
Mm-hmm.
But the manuscripts you have forthcoming, I think we've got some fingerprints on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and Winter King was already good. So people can read Winter King and wait for your next books and see if Camperdown made you better or worse. Which way did the influence go? To your last question, I know we have to probably ditch. Right, Brian? Are we out of time?
I think we're about out of time.
Okay. The last question for you, Christine. Are you ever going to write male protagonists? I know your manuscripts are all female right now.
Yeah. I see if I say no, then what'll happen.
No wrong answer.
I'll say no, and then what'll happen is a year from now, I'll be like, I've got this great idea.
And I'll read it and I'll say, this is a girl, Christine.
Yeah,
just change the name.
I have no plans to, because I think the legwork on that for me would be so much steeper than writing a female protagonist. And it's already hard to write a novel. Why would I make it that much harder on myself?
So when writing a novel is easy and you need to raise the bar a little bit.
Which I do not think it will ever be. I don't know. You've written many more books than I have. Has
Still
it gotten,
not easy.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
I know. We do need to say that we'll return to this subject because we haven't talked about Antigone at all. I wanted some Antigone and Cyrus stuff.
We want to talk about Ashtown.
But we'll come back because I think people are going to be saying, but what about this book? What about this book? They're going to have a lot.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot.
Round two.
And so I'm excited to return to the subject.
No, we won't. We're done. We closed it. We don't care how many comments. Maybe this will stop all the comments.
Yeah.
We don't care.
We've said all there is to say about female protagonists.
Done.
There's nothing more.
Okay. Actually, we talk about whatever Brian wants to talk about. So that means it's going to come up again.
I know.
Maybe Lady Macbeth. Maybe we could talk about anti-heroine.
Yikes.
Yeah. Anti-heroine, since there's so few of those. All right. Well, thank you, Christine.
Okay.
Thanks a bunch.
Thanks,
Thanks,
coming
Christine.
In. More female protagonists.
Please.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Stories Are Soul Food podcast. Don't forget, you can get Christine's Winter King at canonpress.com or listen to her read the audiobook on the Canon app. Download and subscribe today from the app store of your choice. Cheers.